ISO FileMaker Magazine, the professional's resource for FileMaker know-how.
Hey there, my name is Matt Petrowski. You're here because you want to learn FileMaker, but I'm going to tell you what you should do before you start to actually dive in and learn FileMaker. Let's head over to my desktop and take a look. FileMaker is brand new on this machine. And maybe some of these things are things that you should set up or at least be aware of. Now you can see right here, it's wanting me to update. Actually on screen, we can see that as of the release of this video, it's asking me to update to 19.5.3. So let's go over this. Right now, I'm going to say, go ahead and skip this version. I'm not going to interrupt this process. The UI that we see on screen may look a little bit different, but the important thing to know is throughout all of FileMaker's history, the way that FileMaker works really has not changed a whole lot. So videos that you see, even if they're quite older, maybe 2 or 3 years, fundamentally, how you develop in FileMaker is not really different from even 5 years ago as of the recording of this video. So the first thing that I'm going to do in a brand new FileMaker, obviously, if you have a database, you would have opened that database. But for me, opening this copy of FileMaker, the number one thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to go up here to FileMaker. I'm going to go to the preferences, and I'm going to be setting on one of the most important things. Now, if you're on Windows, this is going to be probably under the edit menu at the very bottom of the edit. But in the Macintosh here, we're going to select preferences. We're going to bring that up. The first thing that's going to come up, we've got all of our different tabs of general, layout, memory, shortcuts, plugins, permitted. The one thing that I am most interested in, starting with FileMaker 19 and higher, is this option right here, Use Advanced Tools. Now, this isn't turned on by default, but you definitely want to turn this on. Now, it tells us that FileMaker is going to require a restart. So as I zoom out here, I'm just going to quit FileMaker, and that will allow me to restart it, which I will bring that back up. FileMaker is now reopened, and I will now have an additional menu item. I didn't show you before, but this menu item, let's get it in so we can see it really clearly there, did not exist before, the Tools menu. This Tools menu contains the two things that are probably the most important to anybody who is learning FileMaker. It is the way that you see how to develop or see how somebody else develops something, and also how you can see how to develop yourself. They come in the form of this, the script debugger, which we're going to get into, but more importantly, from a learning standpoint, this data viewer. Now, the important thing about FileMaker is that you can start to learn FileMaker without ever opening a database. And that's where we are going to open the data viewer, and this one little window lets us actually explore all kinds of things about FileMaker. So let's go do that. All right, so we need a web browser to be open, which I have right now with Safari. If you're on Windows, it can be IE, it can be Chrome, Firefox, you name it. Whatever your default browser is, no problem. Now, over in FileMaker, this introduction dialog, I'm going to move the data viewer over to the side here. We're going to keep that open. I'm going to show you the best thing that you can do to start learning FileMaker before you dive into that database that you already have or the one that you're thinking about creating. I'm going to close this new window experience, and we are going to go up to the Help menu. From the Help menu, we are going to choose FileMaker Pro Help. Now, why do we want to access the help? Because quite honestly, it's one of the last places that people to go, but it's the number one place where you can learn about all of the tools that you have available to you in FileMaker. Now, if you don't take the time to learn about the available script steps and the available functions within FileMaker, you're always going to be having to go back and discover what somebody else did if you're unfamiliar with what it does. So my suggestion is playing within FileMaker before you dive into developing a solution or before you dive into the solution that exists is much better. Now, what we're looking for is we scroll down here, and it's not showing, but it's down at the very bottom here. I wish it wouldn't do this, but we can see right there it's hovering. That right there, the reference area of the help, is what we are interested in. It's the primary place that you want to go to And that is because, if I can scroll this over, I can't size these out, but we'll go ahead and take a look at them. This right here, the function reference, is your number one resource for FileMaker help. It is where you are going to learn about all of the possible functions. If you don't learn FileMaker's functions, then you're going to be constantly looking up what those functions do. If you don't know where they are documented, that's a problem. Number two is this one right here, your script step reference. Now, script steps are going to be using FileMaker's functions if you don't already know that. So when we click on this, what we are going to get is a list of all of the possible functions. This is your treasure trove. This is where you are going to find information about how things work. And note, I haven't even opened a FileMaker database yet. We are going to switch over to FileMaker, which I'll do right now in the Finder. We're back. It's going to show our dialog. FileMaker comes up with this dialog every time that we don't have a file open. Now, I'm going to open a file and I'll show you where to get one that matches the current theme as of FileMaker 19. But for right now, what I'm going to do is, without opening a FileMaker database, I am going to play in this area right here with this watch variable. Now remember, at the very beginning of this video, I said under this tools menu, there are two things we are interested in before we ever dive into our database. That is the data viewer and the debugger. And I've got a great video. In fact, a link will be coming up on screen that will show you talking about debugging and how really going in depth in debugging. I won't be doing that in this video, but definitely check that out if you are interested. So with this watch variable, there's this little plus that I can click right here. The plus brings up one of the most common areas that you will find in all of FileMaker. In fact, everywhere and anywhere that you're going to do anything that uses any type of logic, like if this criteria meets this, then do this, otherwise do that. All of that is found within this area called the calculation dialog box. Now, this calculation dialog box is sprinkled throughout all of FileMaker, many, many different places. So being familiar with this is super, super important. You're going to find it in scripts. You're going to find it when you're defining fields. You're going to find it in the user interface when you're setting up tooltips or things called conditional formatting. Conditional formatting is basically the same thing as it is in Excel, where you can just make things different colors or different fonts, but you can do it based on this thing right here, this calculation engine, or the calculation dialog as we call it. So let's get familiar with this. Over on this side right here, what we're going to see is typically a list of fields. These fields are all specific to the solution and how that person or yourself structured the solution. Now, one important thing that we're going to see is this little area, and then in different areas of the dialog, there will be a pop-up menu up here, up in this area where this text currently is. This is an important aspect of FileMaker called context. Context can be a little bit confusing to understand, but we're not going to worry about it right now. We want to understand the fundamental tools, and that is all of our calculations. So when it comes to our calculations, those are over here on the side. Now, these calculations, there's a bunch of them. You can always use this search right here. For example, if I wanted to find the let function. The let function is very important and very valuable right there. Can seem super complex, but there's wonderful videos about that out on the internet as well. You can look up, I probably have a couple of them on YouTube here about let. But you can always search for a function, but unfortunately the functions that right here don't show you anything about what the function does and how to actually use it. We would like to have it down here in the bottom area in this description, and the description does give you some information right here. It tells us that the let function sets a variable or variables to the result of a specified expression for the duration of the calculation or until the script exits or the file is closed. Great. That's not super helpful to me if I've never used the let function. So where can I find some examples? Well, it's right where we left off when we were looking at the help. Over here, the function reference is where you're going to be able to basically scroll down or use the search feature here. Simply type in the let function, let, And it's going to use, unfortunately, FileMaker search. There's a couple ways that I could have done this a little bit easier. We can see right here that it does come up with the let function, but let me use the back button here and see how we could have done this a little bit easier. You can use this search, which is built into the web pages of the help, or what would have been easier is staying right here on the list of functions. I could have just used the Command or Control F. Command if you're on Macintosh, Control if you're on Windows, and simply use the browser's search functionality. So if I do that, something a little bit different comes up. We can see right there. And if I type let right here, what it's going to do is it's looking within this actual page. And here in Safari, it's really cool. It highlights it. I know in Chrome, we can see I've got 1 of 3 matches. I can simply jump to it, and there is the function right here. So this is the key. This is the whole key to learning FileMaker. Spend a half a day, a couple hours, even if you can spare it, or a full day. Simply just go through this list. It's a lot of functions, I know. Take a couple of days if you can. We'll get to looking at scripts here really quickly and just understand what these are. I mean, this may be super confusing to you. Crypt, encrypt, base 64. If you've never even heard of what base 64 is, well, at least you can click right here and find out information about it. But let's go back to that let function. Finding the let, I can scroll to where it exists. I can click on that function, and here's where we get the most valuable information about learning FileMaker possible. We can see it tells us what the function is. It tells us what it expects right here, where we can see, okay, the let expects, and it's very complex. I can see I've got this var, this expression, and I chose this by pretty much intentional because we need to understand how a function actually is broken down, which we'll get to. But it's going to tell you what are all of the pieces coming into this function, and then it will tell us what is actually coming out. So the data type returned here on this function is either a text, a number, a date, time, timestamp, or a container. Well, it turns out the let function actually returns all of the possibilities that FileMaker actually supports. Many of the functions are only going to return one data type, such as text, or just number, or just date or time. The originated in version will tell us when this actual function came out. So if we're working in an older version of FileMaker, 16, 17, 18, if it says originated in 19, we know we can't use it. And of course, if you open up the help for that specific version, it won't even list the function. Now the description, we can read that and it helps us out, but the most important piece to the puzzle are the examples. This is where I learned FileMaker for the first time, and they had a thick manual. I went through it and I had sticky notes throughout that manual, probably hundreds of sticky notes, but we don't have physical books now. We have this digital documentation, and these are the things that are helpful for us to learn. And that is because they start out simple. We can simply copy this right here, and we can see what's going on, and it should help you understand the function, even if it's in a database that you didn't already create. Over here, back in FileMaker, I can simply paste this in, and we can see as I move this up, I can start to play. This is when you start to understand FileMaker. Okay, let. This is saying let x equal 5. 5, and they don't have spaces in here, unfortunately, to make it a little bit more readable. But 5 times 5 allows us to actually have the result of 25. And this is where we're going to actually take the time to play with this particular function. All right, so let's play. Here's one of the reasons that I picked the let function as an example for us to learn from. And that's because we need to understand how a function is actually broken down. Now, right here, I'm saying let x equal 5. Well, if x is 5, 5 times 5 absolutely equals 25. What happens if I want to add in a y? Well, I can see that FileMaker uses the semicolon as a separator, and I put y is equal to, and let's say 2. Well, I'm getting this really weird error that says table missing. That's because I haven't taken the time to fully understand the function. Well, let's break it down right now. In the calculation dialog box, I can start to type any function and it will come up. Let's say it's the cosine or the, I don't know, a time function right there. FileMaker does a really good job of filtering things down, but let's work with the let. So I type in let, and when I hit the return, we can see that FileMaker fills out the full function, the same thing that we see in the help. Well, let's break things down. Anything that starts with this preceding curly bracket is considered optional. Now that can be confusing because right here it's saying the bracket that is the square bracket is optional. What does that mean, optional? Well, it says right here that this, which is not in curly brackets, is what's required. So the let function says var is equal to something. Well, in this case, we've got something that we know that's working from the example. Var is equal to something. But because of these curly braces, we can see that it's optional. So what is this? Well, as soon as I go to var number 2, everything here is within curly braces. That means in order to have two variables, I have to have this bracket. So if I put the bracket there, and then I put the bracket here, what I'm going to get is actually something that works. So we need this opening bracket. We need this closing bracket as soon as we're going to have two variables. And again, this is really the only thing you need to understand about FileMaker's calculations is the optionality versus the non-optionality. This is what can be confusing to anybody who's getting started with FileMaker unless you see an example that's more complex. Heading back over to the examples, can we find one that's more complex? Well, if we go here, we can see that in this case, there is no opening bracket or closing bracket, but the example right after the one that we took a look at does have an example of what we might be interested in. So we could have taken that one right there, or through the process of playing, we can actually work with our own example. So let's head back into the calculation dialog box, and we'll just play a little bit more. Well, we're getting a result now successfully by having added the opening and closing square brackets. But we have this value of y. Well, we know what 5 times 2 is, so we change our x to a y, and we get 10. This is when we start to get understanding, is when we're playing with the functions and we see what's going on. So as I stated, take that time, go through as many of the functions as you want, use your back button, say, I've never played with getField. What does getField do? Well, click on it. If it'll click right here, and it's trying to load it right here, probably because it's online. It is a good idea to download the help if you can. Let's see if FileMaker will load it. There I will click again, and it's just not going to load right now because of the online help. But let me give you a good suggestion about using help. Right now, I must have a problem with my internet connection or something is going on where FileMaker will not load that from the help.claris.com. Maybe my internet connection is down. Well, having offline documentation is just important as having online documentation, and I'll show you a quick little tool that I use in order to have FileMaker's documentation offline. Okay, so having access to the documentation, especially while you're learning, is super helpful. Clicking on the main page of the help, it used to be that down here at the bottom of the help, there used to be a link in order to download FileMaker's help. Well, as of FileMaker 19, Claris decided to change that. You actually have to go to a page on Claris's website. Now, the URL may change, but it's at support.claris.com. And then as I scroll through this here, I'll put the link down in the video description here on YouTube, because this is a pretty long link in order to download the FileMaker help. But once you get to it, you're simply going to be able to find this one right here, Claris FileMaker Pro 19 help with download. This is going to allow you to download it to your actual computer, and I highly suggest it. Here, you should also take the opportunity to download anything else that might help you while you're learning with FileMaker. If you've got a database that uses SQL, or you've got a database that uses ODBC or OData, you're going to find all of the different documentation items that Claris provides here. Simply just search for Google for FileMaker 19 documentation and maybe include the word download. Now, I personally like to use a tool called Dash. It is this right here. And there's a couple of places where you can get a documentation set for this. This is a third-party separate tool, but what makes this really nice is it's very quick for me to look up functions, the way that it's set up. And I'll have a link to this down in the video description as well. So for example, if I want to find something, I quickly just jump in there. You can see that it actually lists the events, which are FileMaker, known as FileMaker's triggers, the functions, of which there are 339 of them that you could potentially use. This is as of FileMaker 19. Commands, which are actually FileMaker's script steps. That's just because these words are specific to other programming languages and it didn't have scripts, or I should say Dash doesn't have the word scripts. And then guides, which is the remaining part of the help. Well, here if I wanted to look at, let's say, what does the get platform do? I can start to type in platform, and there it is right there, get system platform. I select on that, and it quickly takes me to the documentation, which shows me everything that we've already learned. What is the data type returned? When did it actually appear? What does it return? Well, in this case, it returns a number, so I can use those numbers in my calculations. And of course, I can use the examples, which we just took a look at, by simply just selecting, highlighting, going over to the watch variable, pasting it in, and seeing what the calculation engine returns. So now that we've taken the time to understand and learn how to actually explore all of the tools that we have access to, FileMaker's functions, let's take a look at breaking down what has somebody else done? How do I understand scripts? Okay, so you are interested in understanding what somebody else has done. You have an example database, or you're trying to figure out how to do something yourself. This is where that very first thing that I told you to do, turning on the advanced or the developer tools so that we have access to this menu, pays big dividends. We took a look at the data viewer and saw that we can access FileMaker's calculation engine in order to play with all of the functions. The next thing that we need is this tool right here, the script debugger. And what I'm about to show you is the number one way to learn how something else was done and figure out how to understand how to do it yourself. The debugger is a primary tool that all developers use in order to make what would be a fast process into a slow process. Slow enough that we as humans can understand them because the computer can obviously go so fast. With the script debugger open, there's nothing that we can't click in FileMaker and see exactly what was done. Beyond that, we can go right into the script and take a look at how it works. So here is a database, and I'll show you where I got this database in a few moments, but I'm going to show you the number one way to understand how something happens. When I click on this in FileMaker, and I can see as I hover right now, it's got a little effect. This is a button. It's part of a button bar, which is a multi-segment option or in FileMaker. And when I click this, what's going to happen is the debugger is going to catch the fact that FileMaker needs to do something. And in this case, it's running a script. We can see that because the debugger stopped what it would normally do. Clicking on any one of these would normally take me somewhere else, but it might be doing something else. It is a sequence of steps. Those steps are things that I can get into. So again, go ahead and take a look at that debugging video. It'll be much more in-depth and much more helpful here on YouTube. But we can see that there are a number of options. There is this play option, a stop option called halt right there. I've got a step over, which we can see is F5. I've got a step into, that's our most useful, our step out, and our next step. The only one we really need to worry about right now, learning FileMaker, is this one right here. Step into is simply going to say, we're going to step into every single thing that this process is going to do. So as I hit the F6 key, we're going to see that this is going to drop me into a script. Now, the great thing here is you don't have to worry anything about the complexity of the script because we're able to go look at what the script is doing. I mean, obviously, I can scroll right here through this and see and read everything that it's doing. But if there's anything that you don't understand or want to understand, such as a particular function, that's when we just head back over to the documentation and read what that particular step does. So right here, we've got this set field. If you've never used set field, I would take the opportunity to jump over into my documentation. Let me go over to Dash, and I'll bring up my window, my main window right here, and I'll simply type in set field, and it will take me, and I can now read about set field. Now, the reason that I'm showing you this is FileMaker doesn't care. There's no rush for you to actually get something done. FileMaker will sit there perpetually waiting to move to the next step. In fact, as I scroll up, the step that we're on right now is step 11. We can see that because this is green right here. And if I advance this, it will move to the next logical thing. Of course, comments are skipped. So this is how we watch or walk or step through a particular script looking at what it does. What if we want to edit it? Well, this is a great trick. Down here at the bottom, this thing called the call stack is where one script can call another script, can call another script. You can have a stack that's 5, 6, maybe even 10 scripts deep. But at any point, any one of these items, you can double click this in order to go into a window that will let you view the script. Now, let's not get confused. When I double click this, the window comes up separately. But this separate window isn't me editing an individual script or reviewing. I haven't edited anything yet. Now, at this stage, the one thing I don't want to do is click this button. If I don't want the remainder of the script to run, I don't want to close this. If I simply close this, it's directly equivalent to clicking this right here, which is continue out and run the rest of your script. What I want to click is I want to click halt if I actually wanted to debug this process again. I click this stop button, and that stops the remainder of the script from running, whereas clicking this would have allowed the remainder of the script to run. But with the window open now, I can actually take the time and edit this script. If I wanted to change what this particular script step did, I would be able to double click, go into FileMaker's dialog box, and then change whatever I want or investigate what I want. Remember that FileMaker calculation dialog box? And I said it's everywhere. Here it is right here. Everything should be familiar. You've got your functions over here, and you've got your fields over here with your ability to select from all of your different table occurrences. Another video for another time. So, how does this differ from the script workspace? Well, I can see right now that I'm editing a script called navigation. This is just a single script, but this is not the holy grail of where I do all of my editing of my scripts. In FileMaker, we edit all of our scripts within the script workspace, and that is under the script menu, and it's right here, script workspace. Now, this is going to look different than when you're editing a single script, having invoked it from the debugger. But here, if I needed to access that script again, all I had to do was remember the name, and I could put in the search right here and say, what was the script? It was navigation that I was working on, and this allows me to filter down the list of scripts, because you'll be working in a FileMaker database, and you may have hundreds, possibly even thousands of scripts. But that is by far the number one easiest way to see what a particular thing is doing on screen. And here it is again. Go up to your tools, turn on your debugger. If the debugger window is active, the next thing that you click in FileMaker will bring up a script. Let's say I'm clicking on this right here. Well, in this case, this is actually JavaScript, because if I go into layout mode, this is going to be something a little bit more complex, and that is because it's a web viewer. Again, another video for another time, but if I go back into browse mode, and I click, well, in this case, it did bring up a script. I'll go ahead and stop that. I will intentionally click something that will bring up my script. I can now use that step into the script, and again, access it by double-clicking down here, or just reading the name of the script and going into the script workspace and opening that up. Click stop. Oh, it was navigation. I go to script workspace. I type in the word navigation. This is the script that I'm working on. Another thing to note about the scripting workspace: if you do not start to edit a script everything is previewing the script first. You can see that as I select this script and this script, it simply toggles the same window between the two. However, if I double click, that will put the script into edit mode. Or if I select into the script and simply hit a return key, that also will be edit mode. Let's take a look at it, the difference. And it comes down to the fact that this line is not a heavy line. Did you see right there? It's very subtle and it's hard to miss. But when I double clicked on the navigation script and that very faint line became a strong line, that's when I'm in edit mode for that script. That's obvious by the fact that when I click on this other script, it will open up a separate tab. Separate tab, thin line, preview. Thick line, editing. Hard to pick up, but very important. All right, and so finally, what do I need to show you? Where do you get this particular database? In FileMaker 19, they released a new theme, and there's a lot of things to learn about FileMaker. In fact, I have a lot of videos here on YouTube where you can learn, starting from scratch, how to build a database, talking about your structure, that is, defining your fields, defining your tables, defining your relationships, how the relationship graph works, how to script, how to use all of the different functions, all kinds of things. Of course, this would be a 5-hour-long video if I did it all in this video. My goal is just to show you how to get started. And again, getting started comes down to these two tools. The data viewer, being able to work with a calculation engine without having to actually be in a FileMaker database. But of course, you can also be in a FileMaker database, and using the script debugger to see what the flow is of a particular script. Well, these particular solutions that use the FileMaker 19 Apex Blue theme, you can get from this URL, templates.fm. If you go to templates.fm, you will get some starter solutions. If you want to work with some of the solutions that FileMaker has, you can always go up to the new, and when you go to the create new, FileMaker should come up with this right here, and you can of course start with the starter solutions, or of course you can download one of the many solutions that are available online. But of course, with this information now, you know how to invoke the debugger, click on something in the user interface, see what script it is, open that script, and then follow along and learn from the logic. It's the best way to learn FileMaker and dive in and start to understand how other people have done things in FileMaker that you want to do in your own solutions. And as we wrap this video up, I want you to remember that the number one thing you can do for learning FileMaker is to invest the time in understanding as many of the functions that you can as possible. FileMaker can seem overwhelming and complex, but it really only has 339 functions. Break that down to 5 a day and just spend some time learning each of the functions. And I promise you, once you learn the functions and then the script steps, you become a lot more comfortable with understanding what other people have done or what you are trying to do in your own FileMaker solution. And remember, download that documentation so that you can access it and it's really fast and local on your machine instead of trusting the internet. All right, until next time, I'd like to wish you much luck with your own development, and I'll see you in some of my other videos. All right, happy FileMaking. Bye-bye.
We hope you've enjoyed this video tutorial, and we'd like to say thank you for your subscription and your support. If you're not already a subscriber, head on over to www.filemakermagazine.com/subscribe for more information about the benefits of joining.